to Deep Sleep Stories. If these stories have helped you through restless nights, please leave a review. Reviews are what help this podcast grow, reach more listeners, and stay alive. Without them, even something meaningful can slowly disappear. So if this show has brought you comfort, that small act truly helps keep it going. Now, settle in, and let's begin.
Settle in now and welcome to Deep Sleep Stories, where your only task is to soften, to breathe, and to let the day loosen its hold on you. Tonight, you'll drift through a moonlit seaside world where the gentle tide carries a quiet kind of magic. Let your shoulders fall away from your ears. Let your jaw unclench. If your hands are curled, allow them to open as if you're releasing something small and weightless into the air. Breathe in slowly, and then breathe out even more slowly, as though you're exhaling a long sigh that has been waiting for you all day. With each breath, imagine the space around you becoming calmer. The room feels dimmer, softer at the edges. Sounds from far away grow less important. Thoughts that try to tug at you can float past like feathers, like pale petals on a stream. Noticed and then released. Now picture a shoreline at night. Not a dramatic coast with towering cliffs, but a gentle shore, wide and forgiving, where the sand is smooth and cool, and the sea arrives with unhurried kindness. Above, the moon hangs like a lantern made of pearl. Its light spreads over the water in a slow spill, turning the tide into a ribbon of silver. The air tastes faintly of salt and clean distance, and the breeze moves as if it knows it's welcome. In that imagined place, you don't need to do anything at all. You only need to rest. Breathe in and out. The moonlight is steady. The tide is patient. And you are allowed to drift. A little farther down that quiet coast where dunes lean softly toward the sea, there was a village that kept its windows warm even when night came cool. It was the kind of place that did not hurry. Doors were painted in calm colors that had faded gently over time. Gardens were tucked into sheltered corners with herbs and small flowers that held onto the day's scent as long as they could. The village had a name, though most travelers did not know it, and those who lived there did not often say it aloud. Names were less important than familiar paths, less important than the sound of the sea folding and unfolding, less important than the moon's pale glow lifting the world into softness. At the edge of that village lived a person named Mira. Mira's cottage faced the shore, not directly, but at a slight angle, as if it wanted to be near the sea without demanding all of its attention. The cottage had a roof of weathered shingles and a small porch where a chair waited patiently for evening. Wind chimes hung by the door, and they whispered delicate notes whenever the breeze wandered by. Inside, the cottage smelled of dried lavender and warm wood. A kettle often sat on the stove, and a little jar of honey gleamed on the table like captured sunlight. Books were stacked in gentle leaning piles, and a woven blanket lay folded, ready to be pulled across knees on nights when the air grew cooler. Mira had a simple rhythm to her days. She rose when the light was kind. She listened to the gulls, not as noise, but as the village's way of saying the morning had arrived. She tended her small garden and mended nets for those who fished. She made tea for neighbors who stopped by to share a quiet thought or two. She walked the shoreline when the tide allowed it, letting the ocean smooth the inside of her mind the way it smoothed stones. And every evening when the sky deepened into velvety blues, Mira did something that belonged only to her. She carried a lantern down to the beach. It was not an ordinary lantern, though at first glance it could have been. It had a simple handle, a glass chamber, and a metal frame that had been polished by years of use. But the light within it was unusual. It did not flicker like flame. It did not sputter or struggle against the wind. Instead, it glowed with a steady hush, as if it were made from moonlight that had learned how to rest in a small space. The villagers had seen Mira with it sometimes. They would nod kindly, as if she were simply taking a stroll, as if a lantern full of quiet light were nothing strange at all. In that village, people were gentle with mysteries. They did not poke at them with sharp curiosity. They let wonder be what it was. Mira did not speak much about the lantern, not because she was secretive, but because it felt like something that understood silence. Some things, she believed, were happier when they were not explained. On this particular night, the air was especially calm. The horizon was clear, and the moon hung high and bright, a smooth disk of pale radiance. The tide was coming in slowly, its edge curling toward the sand with soft persistence. Each wave arrived with a sigh, slid forward, and then eased back, leaving behind a thin sheen that reflected the sky. Mira stepped onto the beach, her boots making quiet impressions in the damp sand. She held the lantern at her side, and its light painted a faint glow on her skirt and hands. The lantern seemed to breathe with her, brightening subtly as she inhaled, dimming gently as she exhaled. She paused where the sand was firm and smooth, and she looked out over the water. The ocean at night was different than the ocean in day. In daylight, it could sparkle and shout, its surface busy with brightness. But at night, it became something deeper and more tender. The waves were quieter. The water's dark body held the moon's reflection like a promise. Everything felt slower, as if the world itself had decided to speak in a softer voice. Mira lowered herself to sit on a piece of driftwood that lay like a long, pale curve near the dunes. She placed the lantern beside her, and its glow pooled around them both, a small circle of calm. The tide's rhythm began to weave around her thoughts, in and out, forward and back, near and far. The sea did not ask her to solve anything. It did not demand answers. It offered repetition, a gentle pattern that could carry any mind toward rest. Mira watched the water for a while, her gaze unfocused, as though she were looking not at the waves themselves, but at the feeling they created. She listened to the hush of foam sliding over sand. She listened to the faint creak of the driftwood under her, a sound like a whispering door in an old house. She listened to the wind, which moved so lightly It barely stirred her hair. After some time, she noticed something subtle. The moonlight on the water seemed to gather in one place, as if it were being drawn there. Not in a sharp beam, not like a spotlight, but like a slow tide of brightness. The silver sheen thickened into a gentle glow, a bright patch drifting closer with the waves. Mira didn't tense. She didn't startle. She only leaned forward a little, curious in the quietest way. The bright patch of moonlight reached the shallows. The water there lifted and fell, and within it, something shimmered. Something that was not a fish, not a piece of drifting shell, not foam. It moved like a thought, moving through a dream. Then it rose, just above the surface where the wave broke and smoothed itself out. A small figure hovered, woven from light. It was delicate, no larger than a seabird, and it did not flap wings. It simply floated, held up by the gentle lift of air and the kindness of the tide. The figure's shape shifted subtly, as if it were deciding what it wanted to be. At times it looked like a tiny boat made of moonbeams. At times it looked like a ribbon twisting slowly. At times it looked almost like a person, but only in the way a cloud can look like one if you're not trying too hard. Mira breathed in, and the lantern beside her brightened, almost as if it recognized the visitor. The figure drifted closer, and when it reached the line where wet sand met dry, it paused in midair. Mira spoke, but her voice was barely above the tide. "Hello?" she said, as if greeting a neighbor. The figure did not answer in words. Instead, it gave off a feeling warm and gentle, like the memory of sunlight on skin. The feeling brushed against Mira's mind, not intruding, simply arriving like the tide arriving, inevitable and calm. Mira understood in her own quiet way that this was an invitation, not an urgent one, not a demanding one. An invitation like an open door in a familiar house. She looked at her lantern and then back at the shimmering figure. The lantern's steady glow seemed to widen, its light reaching farther across the sand. Mira stood slowly, letting her muscles move without haste. She lifted the lantern by its handle. The figure drifted backward, hovering just above the shore, as if guiding her. Together they began to walk. Mira's steps were unhurried. The beach was smooth and cool beneath her boots, and the air held that clean scent of night sea. The lantern cast a soft pool of light around her feet, while the moon poured silver over everything beyond. The figure floated ahead, always just far enough to lead without pulling. As Mira walked, the village behind her grew quieter, smaller, as though it were slipping into sleep along with the rest of the world. Lights in windows dimmed. The line of cottages and gardens softened into shadow. Soon there was only the shore, the dunes, and the tide's steady breathing. The figure guided Mira toward a part of the beach where the sand gave way to a gentle curve of rock. Smooth stones worn by years of water's patient touch. Between the stones were small tide pools that caught pieces of the sky, holding tiny reflections of moon and stars. Mira stepped carefully, her boots finding stable places without needing to think too hard. She moved like someone who trusted the ground beneath her. The figure hovered above a tide pool, and the water there glowed faintly as if lit from within. Mira leaned closer. In the pool, she saw not just water, but a drifting scene. It was the sea, yes, but it was the sea in another mood, another moment. The water in the pool showed waves rolling under a different moon, a moon that looked slightly larger, slightly closer. The sand looked untouched, smooth as fresh silk. A line of shells glimmered as though arranged deliberately. Mira stared, and her breath slowed further. The lantern's light warmed her hands. The figure pulsed softly, like a heart made of moonlight, and Mira felt a thought form in her mind. A gentle direction, a suggestion of where to go next. She followed without question. They continued along the rocks until the beach widened again. Here the tide came in with even more softness, as if the sea were careful not to disturb something precious. The waves slid onto the shore and retreated with a hush that sounded like someone smoothing a blanket. Farther ahead, a faint line of brightness traced the edge of the water. Mira's eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in focus. She realized the brightness was not just reflection, it was bioluminescence. Tiny living lights stirred by the movement of the sea. Each wave carried a lace of glowing blue-white sparkles, and when it collapsed onto the sand, the glow scattered like a handful of stardust. The figure drifted down toward this glowing edge and hovered above it, bathing in the light as if it belonged there. Mira walked closer and stopped at the line where the tide would brush her boots if she stepped too far. She held the lantern low, and its moonlit glow mingled with the sea's living sparkle, creating a gentle blend of pale light and soft blue shimmer. The water surged forward just enough to kiss the sand near Mira's toes, and the bioluminescent sparkles brightened in response. It was as if the sea sighed and smiled at the same time. Mira felt her chest loosen, as if the ocean were untying small knots she hadn't known she carried. She watched the glowing edge of the tide for a long time, letting her mind drift. Thoughts came and went. Some were from the day, small tasks, brief conversations, the feel of sun on her cheek. Others were deeper, quieter, and through it all, the tide kept arriving and leaving, never rushing, never lingering too long. The figure moved again, drawing Mira onward. Now the beach began to curve, and the dunes rose a little higher, sheltering the shore from any distant winds. The moon hung above at an angle that made its light spill across the sand like a path. The path seemed to point toward a place where the shoreline narrowed, where a cluster of sea-worn stones formed a kind of natural arch. Mira approached the arch, and as she did, she heard something new, a sound beneath the sound, not louder than the waves, but layered within them, a low, humming tone, as if the stones themselves were singing along with the tide. The sound was so gentle it felt more like vibration than noise, more like a lullaby, felt in the bones than heard in the ears. The figure hovered under the arch, its light blending with the moon's reflection on the wet stones. It looked almost translucent now, as if the night were gently absorbing it. Mira stepped beneath the arch, holding the lantern close. The humming deepened slightly, becoming warmer, steadier. It wrapped around Mira like a soft scarf. Her shoulders dropped further, her breathing slowed. Beyond the arch, the world changed in a subtle way. The sand was finer here, almost silky. The water was calmer, protected by the curve of land. The tide moved in broader, smoother sheets, as if it were laying down quiet layers of glass. And in the center of this sheltered cove, something rested at the edge of the water. A boat. Not a large boat, not the kind used for fishing or travel between towns. It was small, shaped like a shallow cradle carved from pale wood that looked like it had been polished by moonlight itself. Its surface gleamed softly. It sat half in the water, half on the sand, as if it were waiting for the tide to lift it. Mira did not feel surprise so much as recognition. She had never seen this boat before, not with her waking eyes, but it felt familiar in the way a dream place can feel familiar, like somewhere you have been without remembering exactly when. The figure hovered above the boat, and the lantern in Mira's hand glowed a little brighter, answering the shimmer of the moon. For a moment, the three lights, the moon, the lantern, and the figure, seemed to align, creating a sense of gentle completeness. Mira stepped closer. Inside the boat was a blanket, folded neatly, the color of deep night sky. Beside it lay a small cushion, pale and inviting. The boat's interior smelled faintly of cedar and sea air. Mira looked at the water. It was so calm in the cove that the moon's reflection seemed almost solid, like a road made of silver. The figure drifted to the boat's edge, and that warm feeling brushed Mira's mind again. Not words, but reassurance. An invitation to rest. An invitation to drift. Mira, who trusted the sea and the quiet ways of the world, climbed carefully into the boat. She sat, then eased herself back, arranging the cushion beneath her head. She pulled the blanket over her legs. She placed her lantern at the front of the boat where it could glow without being held. Its light spread gently across the boat's pale wood, turning everything into softness. The figure hovered above Mira for a moment, then drifted to the front as well, settling near the lantern like a small guardian made of light. The tide, patient as ever, began to lift the boat. Not suddenly, not with a jolt. It rose as gently as a feather, rising on a breath. The boat floated free of the sand and began to drift outward into the cove. Mira's hands rested loosely on her stomach, fingers relaxed. Her eyes stayed open for a while, watching the moon and the dark sky. She watched the stars, which looked sharper in the coastal air, their light steady and ancient. The boat moved without oars, guided by the tide's slow intelligence. It glided over water that barely rippled, It was as though the sea wanted Mira to feel safe, to feel held. As the boat drifted, Mira's thoughts began to soften around the edges. The day's worries, if any had clung to her, started to slide away like sand slipping through fingers. Her mind became spacious, airy, as if the night were opening doors inside her. The figure at the front of the boat pulsed gently, and the lantern's glow seemed to hum along with it. The cove's stone arch was behind them now, and ahead was open water, calm and welcoming. The boat drifted beyond the cove, not into rough sea, but into a wide, peaceful stretch, where the coast curved in a protective embrace. The tide here rolled in long, slow movements, like the rise and fall of a sleeping breath. Mira watched the moon's reflection stretch across the water, shimmering slightly with each gentle swell. The reflection looked like a path, and the boat followed it, gliding along the silver. Along the coast, the dunes turned to low cliffs, covered in soft grasses. Above the cliffs were dark silhouettes of trees, their branches still in the calm air. Occasionally, a night bird called out, its sound brief and distant, like a reminder that the world was alive, even in quiet. The boat drifted past a small inlet where the water smelled a little sweeter, touched by fresh water from a hidden stream. Mira could hear the faint trickle of it, a delicate sound that braided itself with the ocean's hush. The lantern's glow warmed the air near Mira's feet. The blanket across her legs felt heavy in the most comforting way, the way a good blanket makes the body feel anchored. The figure, this moonlit companion, floated slightly above the lantern, and its light drifted in soft patterns like slow-moving clouds of brightness. As the boat continued, Mira began to notice shapes beneath the surface of the water, not threatening shapes, gentle ones. A school of fish moved together in a slow, coordinated glide, their bodies catching moonlight in flashes. They passed beneath the boat like a living ribbon, then disappeared into deeper dark. Farther on, the water below glowed faintly again with that living sparkle, stirred by the boat's passage. Tiny points of light bloomed and faded, as if the sea were breathing out stars. Mira's eyelids grew heavier, but she kept them open, savoring the quiet wonder. In the distance, something rose from the sea, a small island. It was not rocky and sharp, but rounded and soft, like a sleeping creature. Its edges were lined with pale sand. Above it rose a cluster of smooth stones and low plants that moved slightly in the breeze. The island was small, but it seemed to carry a gentle presence, as if it held a secret. The boat drifted toward it, guided by tide and moonlight. As they approached, Mira heard a sound like chimes, very faint, not the chimes at her cottage door, but something similar. Delicate notes carried on the air. The figure brightened softly as if pleased. The boat slid onto the island's shallow shore, coming to rest with barely a sound. Mira sat up slowly, feeling the cool night air on her face. The sand here was smooth and clean, and it held a faint warmth from the day, stored like a memory. Mira stepped out of the boat, her boots sinking gently. She lifted the lantern and held it close, its glow steady. The figure drifted ahead, leading her across the island. The chime-like sound grew slightly clearer, still soft, still far from urgent. It seemed to come from the center of the island, where the stones rose like a small circle. Mira walked toward them, her steps slow. The plants around the stones were low and silvery in the moonlight, their leaves reflecting pale glow. The air smelled of salt and something faintly floral, as if the island carried its own quiet perfume. At the center of the stone circle was a pool. Not a tide pool. A still pool, round and smooth-edged, as if the stones had gathered to protect it. Its surface was perfectly calm, reflecting the moon with such clarity it looked like a second sky beneath the world. Mira approached the pool and looked down. The water did not show her face. Instead, it showed a moving scene, like the tide pool before, but clearer, deeper. It showed the shoreline near her village. It showed the lantern light in her cottage window. It showed the gardens tucked into corners. It showed people moving slowly through their evening routines, closing shutters, lifting blankets, setting teacups in sinks. It was as if the pool held not just images, but the feeling of home. Warmth, safety, soft belonging. Mira's chest filled with a gentle tenderness. The figure hovered above the pool, and the chime-like sound seemed to come from it now, from the water itself. The sound was not a melody that demanded attention. It was more like a comforting tone, like a lullaby without words. Mira sat on the smooth sand near the pool, lantern beside her. She watched the water's surface, letting the images drift by. Now it showed the ocean from above. Moonlight spread across it like silk. Now it showed the inside of a shell, pearly and quiet. Now it showed a sleeping seabird tucked into the crook of a rock, feathers rising and falling with breath. Now it showed a field of tall grass moving under starlight. Each image arrived slowly, stayed long enough to be felt, and then slipped away. Mira found herself breathing in time with the pool's gentle chime. In and out. The island felt like a pause in the world, a place where the sea's constant motion settled into stillness for a while. Even the breeze seemed softer here, careful not to disturb the calm surface of the water. Mira's eyelids drooped. Her shoulders relaxed further. Her hands rested in her lap, palms open. The figure drifted closer to her, and its light softened until it was more glow than shape. It hovered near Mira's chest like a small floating warmth. Mira did not try to understand it. She did not ask what it was or why it had come. She simply allowed herself to be here, in this quiet place under the moon, with the gentle tide all around. The lantern's glow mingled with the moonlight, and everything became a single, soothing palette of pale silver and warm hush. After a long while, long enough the time felt like it had dissolved, Mira stood again. She picked up the lantern and followed the figure back toward the boat. The island's sand felt cool now, and the chime-like sound faded behind her as she walked away from the stone circle. It did not vanish abruptly, it simply receded, like a wave pulling back, leaving calm in its place. The boat waited at the shore as if it had never moved. Mira stepped into it, settling onto the cushion, pulling the blanket over her legs again. She set the lantern at the front and the figure hovered nearby, dimmer now, as if it too were growing sleepy. The tide lifted the boat gently, turning it away from the island. They drifted back onto the moon's silver path. Mira lay back, watching the sky. The stars seemed to move very slowly, or perhaps it was only the boat moving. The sensation was soothing either way, like rocking in a cradle that belonged to the ocean. The sea was calm, and its sound was steady. Soft waves, soft foam, soft breathing. As they drifted, Mira's thoughts became fewer. Not because she was pushing them away, but because they simply did not come as often. Her mind was settling, like sand settling in clear water. The figure at the front of the boat dimmed further, becoming a faint glow, almost indistinguishable from the lantern's light. The lantern itself seemed softer too, as if it were learning to rest. The coastline passed by in gentle silhouettes. Dunes like sleeping hills, grasses like quiet hair, trees like still guardians. Everything looked peaceful in the moon's wash. Eventually the stone arch appeared again, a dark curve against silver water. The boat drifted toward it, passing beneath with the faintest echo of that humming tone, like a last note of a lullaby. The cove welcomed them back with its calm, glassy water. The boat glided toward the shore and settled into the sand with barely a sound. Mira sat up slowly, as though she were waking from a dream, though she had never truly fallen asleep. She stepped out onto the sand, lantern in hand. The figure hovered above the boat for a moment longer, then drifted toward the water's edge. There it paused, as if saying goodbye in its quiet way. Its glow pulsed once, warm and gentle, and then it rose slightly, dissolving into the moonlight, until it was simply part of the night again. Mira watched without sadness. The feeling it left behind was not loss, but calm completion, like the end of a soothing song. She turned and began to walk back along the shore toward the village. Her steps were slow, her posture relaxed. The lantern's glow lit the sand ahead of her in a small, comforting circle. The tide continued its steady breathing beside her, and the moon continued to watch over everything with patient light. As Mira approached the village, the cottages appeared like soft shapes, nestled into darkness. A few windows still held warm glows, but most were dim now, the village sinking deeper into sleep. Mira reached her own cottage and stepped onto the porch. The wind chimes whispered softly. As she opened the door, their sound gentle as a sigh. Inside, the air was warmer. The scent of lavender greeted her like a familiar hand on her shoulder. Mira set the lantern on the table and it glowed quietly. as if content. She removed her boots and moved through her cottage with slow, sleepy ease. She poured a small cup of water, took a sip, and set it down. She drew the woven blanket over the back of her chair, smoothing it absent-mindedly, as if smoothing the edges of her day. Then she went to her bed. The sheets were cool at first, then quickly warmed. Mira lay down and pulled her own blanket up to her chest. Outside, the sea continued its hush, distant but present, like a lullaby carried through the night air. The lantern's glow from the other room was faint now, barely visible, but its presence felt comforting, as though a small piece of moonlight had come indoors to keep watch. Mira's breathing slowed. Her eyelids grew heavy. Her body softened into the mattress, muscles letting go one by one, as though each part of her were being invited to rest. The moonlight outside remained steady, spilling across the shore, over the gentle tide, over the sleeping village. And now, as the world settles into its quiet rhythm, you can settle too. Let your breath become slow and easy. Let your thoughts become distant, like waves far out at sea. There is nothing you need to hold, nothing you need to solve, only this soft night, only this gentle tide. If an image lingers in your mind, let it be the moonlight on the water, silver and calm, moving in slow, soothing patterns. Let it be the sense of being carried safely by a steady rhythm that has existed long before this moment and will continue long after, patient and kind. Your body can rest. Your mind can drift. The night can hold you without effort. Good night, dear traveler. Sleep well.